Hi everyone, welcome back to week 2's video 7 on effectuation. We ended video 6 with a brief overview of the effectuation process. We learned that entrepreneurs start the effectuation process with 3 means that they have to work with. Who they are, that means their traits, their tastes, their abilities, their assets. What they know, their education, their training, their expertise, their experience, and finally, whom they know, their social and professional networks. And using these means or ingredients, entrepreneurs can begin to imagine possible ends. I actually think that as we're trying to understand the difference between the causal and the effectual process, it helps to see it visually. So let's start with a visual that explains causal reasoning. So in this approach, you have a predetermined goal, a specific business idea or business model in mind, and you assume that your process should be to begin by making a plan and then assembling resources in order to execute that plan. Whereas in an effectual process, you start with what do I have and what are the many different variations of the possible ends or ideas that I could create given the means that I have. I like the metaphor that Sarasvathy gives in the article that I asked you to read related to cooking. So on the one hand, a causal approach involves deciding what you're going to make, finding a recipe, going shopping, and executing. Whereas on the other hand, seeing what you have on hand, the ingredients that you have in your cupboard and your fridge, what you already know or are good at cooking, tasting along the way, adding seasoning, and possibly not even knowing exactly what your final meal will turn out to be, but being okay with that ambiguity. Does that mean that you have no end goal in mind? No, of course not. It means having a good sense of the general outcomes you would find satisfying. That might be creating a new product, that might be establishing a new company, that might be finding a solution to some problem that you care about, that might be being financially independent. There are many different goals that you would still be able to apply effectual reasoning to. To go back to the metaphor, perhaps you feel like something hearty, like a stew, but what kind of stew exactly would be left to be determined through the process. Let me give you a more concrete example that might resonate a little more with your own experience. Let's imagine you're a finance student with an interest in sustainability. The problem that you see, that you've identified, is that finance students at the Alberta School of Business are not getting sufficient exposure to hands-on experience in the field of sustainable finance. Because you're alert to opportunities, you learn that there is a business plan competition called the Social Venture Capital Investment Competition that several universities in the US participate in. You love this idea and decide, aha, that's it. We are going to bring the Social Venture Capital Investment Competition to the Alberta School of Business. You spend valuable resources, your time, to develop a plan to do this, and you expend significant social capital trying to push it to happen, only to find out that the Social Venture Capital Investment Competition Network is only based in the US, only available to US universities, and the idea withers before it even starts. So that would be a causal approach to the problem that you've identified. An alternative way to do that would be to, with the same basic idea or problem in mind, to start by making a list of your means that might be relevant to this problem. You might have an alumni network that you could draw from. In particular, you might identify a couple of alumni working in the field of sustainable finance. You have a couple of friends who are equally interested in sustainable finance. You might have an aunt who works for TD Bank. You might be particularly gifted at social media campaigns. You also know that it's become easier to convene people post-COVID because, hey, what's just one more Zoom call? And within a week, you have convened a Zoom meeting, it's happening, and the network that you have convened for the call includes about 10 people, all excited about this problem. You present the problem to them, and ideas start flying. The many ideas come together in the form of a sustainable investment fund managed by students. You realize that this will need corporate sponsorship. You talk to your aunt, and she agrees to let you pitch it to TD Bank. They're interested, but want to see the pedagogical or learning outcomes before they agree to sponsor. You go back to your group. Someone suggests talking to one of the professors working in the field. You convince your professor to run an intensive class for a small group of finance students on sustainable finance over spring break. You take the syllabus to TD, and they agree to act as a corporate sponsor for the fund. The undergraduate office hears about it and decides to make the course a required course in the finance program and creates a sustainable finance certificate program around it and the student-run fund. You promote this heavily with your social media savvy, and soon a sustainable finance speaker series is born, attracting thought leaders in sustainable finance to the business school. So hopefully you can identify which of these processes reflected causal reasoning and which reflected effectual reasoning, and which was ultimately more successful at getting to this student's ultimate goal. Okay, so hopefully with that anecdote, I've convinced you of the merits of the effectuation process. Let's move into the 3 principles that the article I asked you to read focuses on. The first is the affordable loss principle. So first, entrepreneurs set an upper bound on what they are willing or able to lose in order to start a new venture. And this may even be 0 if you are not able to lose anything in terms of financial resources or even social capital. And second, the entrepreneur finds creative ways to implement their ideas within the means that they are able to put into the venture. So this is actually a very different approach from creating a budget based on how much you think you'll need in order to execute your specific plan. Let's go back to the article and think about how Leonard Schoen from U-Haul used these principles. His affordable loss was very low, so he had to use the means he had. So what was that? In the article, they described him having a really supportive family that had a milk house on their farm. He had friends to sell cheap trailers to, and he had mobility, which was important to him. He also figured out a way to make sure his investment was spread across a whole range of stakeholders. The second principle that Sarasvathy talks about in the article is the strategic partnerships principle. This principle focuses on building partnerships rather than on doing a systematic competitive analysis. And this is a key difference between these 2 approaches. So students will often come to me and say, I have an idea for a business, but I don't really want to tell anyone about it. And the effectual approach basically tries to dissuade entrepreneurs from that very natural feeling that anyone you might tell or approach about a partnership might want to steal your idea. By replacing that natural tendency that people often have with the idea that A, ideas are cheap, and it's not about the idea, it's about the implementation, and that any given idea can actually be implemented in 1,000 different ways, and would be implemented in 1,000 different ways based on precisely who you're talking to, who you are, and how you've developed those partnerships. So how was this exemplified by Leonard Schoen from the article? He bought trucks and trailers. He sold them to employees, family, friends, investors, who would then lease them back to his company. And even more importantly, he partnered with gas station chains to utilize their underused parking spaces for his vehicles, which had big distinctive signs on them. The third principle is called the principle of leveraging contingencies. This principle says that in entrepreneurship, there are a lot of surprises. Things often don't go as planned, but not all surprises are bad. In fact, social interactions often determine the shape of the entrepreneurial venture, as we've said. So it's not about avoiding surprises. It's about using those surprises to help determine what strategic direction you're going to want to go in. For Schoen, he was forced to practically give away initial trailers to renters. That was not necessarily what he was expecting to have to do. But suddenly, because he had to do this, this created a network of dealers who were really bought into his idea, and a bunch of free marketing because people were driving these trailers that he had initially had to practically give away across the country. And that was what initially started his business on a successful path. Okay, so to summarize, the underlying logic of causal versus effectual thinking is the starting point with causal thinking is with a set of given goals. I'm going to go about assembling a plan and finding resources to achieve it, a fixed set of resources. Versus effectual thinking starts with who I am, what I know, who I know, and works forward from there. And the attitude toward risk is different as a result of that starting point. With a causal logic, you're thinking about your expected returns and you'll calculate the upside potential, and based on that, pursue the best opportunity. Versus the logic behind affordable loss is that you'll only risk as much as you can afford to lose. So you're more free to experiment and pivot and change based on changing circumstances and surprises. Your underlying attitude towards others is very different too. In causal approaches, you're focused on competition, and you, as a result of that, are going to be setting up what often seem like very transactional relationships with customers, suppliers, and other market actors. Whereas in an effectual approach, the idea is that you are actually co-creating with your stakeholders. You build a market together with your customers, suppliers, and even sometimes prospective competitors. And of course, in entrepreneurship, there are always those unexpected turns of events. So you need to decide whether you will try to avoid surprises at all costs, or whether you will be open to leveraging surprises, which can lead to new opportunities and innovation. Okay, so concretely, what does that mean? Where do you start? You start with taking an inventory of your available means. Who I am, what I know, who I know. Next, consider your attitude toward risk. Come to grips with your worst case scenario. Calculate your downside or worst case scenario and risk no more than you can afford in those early days. Consider the fact that failure is part of the process. So design into your early stage of your venture ways to make failure a learning opportunity. Consider your attitude towards others and think about how to make your approach co-creational, or in other words, building a market together with customers, suppliers, and competitors. How? Make an inventory of those who have complementary skills and common values, who can and want to help you create the opportunity. Engage them in envisioning opportunities, like I described in the scenario about sustainable finance. These often will help to bring to the surface ideas that you couldn't create alone. And finally, think about how you'll leverage surprises, or in other words, pay attention to and track things that don't necessarily go according to plan. So let's take an even deeper dive into this. I want you to start by making a list of all the people in your reach who could be stakeholders of your project. Starting with who you already know has a great advantage. You have a starting point and you don't have to build a relationship from scratch. In other words, start this process from inside out. So 1, who in your family might be interested in your project? Which close friends could you reach out to? And then work your way through the contact list on your mobile phone. Who could you call to talk to about your project? Consider your peers or former peers from work, from the university, from your sports team, from hobbies that you have. And then finally work your way to people you know in a sort of second degree. And when you're done with that initial list, ask yourself, what kind of contribution can you imagine from each of these people? What specific ask would you have for them? And whenever you are ready to ask, when picking up the phone, consider your affordable loss. You don't have to start your ask journey with someone really high stakes. like your former boss. If you can practice your asks in more relaxed relationships, that can be a really helpful way to start. So start with easy or low stakes asks and then work your way up. Now you're ready to widen the net by inviting more people in. Give people the opportunity to opt in. Find ways to let people know about what you're doing so that they might even come to you with their own ask to get involved somehow. Start by creating an email list of all the people you know who might be interested. And then just send them a note telling them what you're starting to do, telling them you'll be doing a regular email update on your activities, and giving them the option to opt out. Set yourself a calendar reminder to religiously send out a regular update every, might be month, might be week, might be quarter, whatever you decide. And then for each note that you send out to these prospective stakeholders, share some progress you've made or some news of relevance to what you're doing. And maybe let people know what you're currently looking for. You can do this by email, blogging, or microblogging, like posting on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. These are all great vehicles to achieve the same thing. You're basically building a coalition around the idea that you're trying to create. And then finally, consider changing roles with these individuals. Don't constrain people to their current relationship with you. Give the people you already work with opportunities to increase their participation with you. So ask yourself questions like the following. Might your customer also want to be your investor? Might your landlord be able to use your product or service? Might the company next door to you be interested in sharing resources like internet access, manufacturing capacity, etc.? Might your supplier offer you better terms if you could offer them your product? Each of these possibilities of reconfiguring your relationship with existing people you know can form the basis of a specific or an open-ended ask. Okay, so putting it all together, a process that starts with available means leads to a range of possible actions. Discussing these actions and interactions with other people leads to potential partnerships and buy-in from stakeholders. These stakeholders and partners then become part of your new means set and add to your new goals, creating not just new potential businesses, but even new markets that didn't previously exist. So I used to do a role-playing case that really illustrates this idea. The case was the Ice Hotel case, which is the story of one entrepreneur, Yngve Bergqvist, who began with one idea for a venture and ended up starting something completely different through an effectual process. Now that the course is too big, I'm going to ask you to watch a brief video that traces his story. And as you're watching it, I want you to think about everything that I've just discussed and try to identify the different parts of the effectual process. So I'd ask you to stop here and take a watch of this video.